somewhere beyond the noise of ordinary evenings, beyond the clouds, beyond the moonlit seas, beyond even the highest shelves of the hidden library. A sky filled with lanterns is already waiting. Not ordinary lanterns. These lanterns carry quiet hopes, gentle dreams, unspoken courage, and every night, one by one, they rise into the endless sky, except for one. One lantern has never flown, not because it is broken, not because its light is too small, but because some journeys take a little longer to believe they belong among the stars. Tonight, Elias follows a new doorway into a world suspended above the clouds, where floating gardens drift upon the wind, bridges of light stretch across the sky, and countless lanterns wait for the moment they are finally ready to rise. Here, he will discover that the brightest lights are not the ones we hold onto forever. They are the ones we learn to release. Welcome to Sleep with Stories, and to another journey inside the hidden library. So settle comfortably beneath your blankets. Allow your breathing to slow. Let the day quietly drift away. And together, let's step into the sky. If these peaceful journeys have become a comforting part of your evenings, your support through liking, subscribing, and sharing helps. Keep Elias, the hidden library, and this growing family of travelers alive for everyone already walking this path, and for every traveler still waiting to discover it. Now, the lanterns are waiting, and the sky is ready to open. The doorway opened without a sound, not by swinging inward, not by slowly revealing what lay beyond. It simply became sky. The polished cedar floor of the hidden library faded gently beneath Elias's boots, replaced by soft white clouds that stretched farther than even the endless shelves behind him. He took one unhurried step forward. The air felt different here, lighter, cooler. Every breath carried the clean fragrance of morning after gentle rain. There was no wind, yet the clouds drifted peacefully beneath him, moving with such quiet grace that they resembled slow rivers flowing across the heavens. Behind him, the familiar doorway of the hidden library still stood. Warm lantern light spilled softly through its carved frame, a gentle reminder that home was never far away. Elias smiled. He no longer looked back because he was uncertain. He looked back because gratitude had quietly become part of every beginning. The blossom lantern hanging beside him glowed with its calm golden light. Its blossoms swayed ever so slightly, almost as though they too wished to greet the open sky. Ahead, the clouds slowly parted. Beyond them floated dozens of small islands, suspended effortlessly in the endless blue. Some were no larger than quiet gardens. Others carried graceful cottages with curved wooden roofs, their chimneys releasing silver ribbons of smoke that disappeared into sunlight instead of drifting downward. Elegant stone bridges arched from one floating island to another, not supported by pillars, simply resting upon the trust of the sky itself. Golden vines climbed along their railings. Tiny white flowers bloomed between polished stones. Everything appeared wonderfully ordinary. If ordinary places had learned how to dream. Far above, countless golden lanterns floated upward. Thousands, perhaps millions, each moved at its own peaceful pace. None hurried, none followed another. They rose gently through the endless blue until they became little stars scattered across the heavens. Elias watched them in silent wonder. "They are beautiful." His whisper disappeared into the open sky. Then he noticed something unexpected. One lantern remained far below the others. It hovered quietly above a lonely cloud. Its light was warm, steady, perfectly whole, and yet it never rose. The other lanterns continued climbing peacefully toward the endless heavens. Only this one remained exactly where it was. Not trapped, not falling, simply waiting. For reasons Elias could not yet understand. His eyes remained fixed upon it. The blossom lantern beside him shimmered softly, not brighter, only warmer, almost, as though it had quietly recognized an old friend. And somewhere beyond the drifting clouds, a single wind chime rang, clear, gentle, almost like the sky itself had just whispered, "Welcome, traveler." Elias continued watching the quiet lantern. It neither drifted downward nor reached toward the endless heavens. It simply remained where it was, perfectly still, perfectly patient. The longer he looked, the less it seemed lonely. Instead, it felt peaceful, almost as though it understood something the other lanterns did not. A narrow bridge of white stone slowly emerged from the clouds before him. Not built, not placed, it simply revealed itself beneath the gentle morning light. The bridge curved gracefully toward the quiet lantern resting in the distance. Without hesitation, Elias stepped onto it. Each stone beneath his boots carried faint golden veins that shimmered softly with every footstep. The bridge made no sound. Even silence seemed lighter here. As he walked, he noticed tiny birds weaving effortlessly through the sky. They were unlike any birds he had seen before. Their feathers shimmered with warm shades of ivory, amber, and pale gold. Each carried a tiny lantern suspended beneath its beak by delicate silver thread. The lanterns were no larger than an apple blossom, yet everyone glowed with steady warmth. The little birds flew neither quickly nor aimlessly. They traveled with quiet purpose. Some descended toward the floating villages. Others disappeared into distant clouds. Several gently circled the lantern that had never risen. None attempted to lift it. None disturbed its peaceful waiting. They simply greeted it before continuing their own gentle journeys. Elias smiled. "They are delivering lanterns." A familiar voice answered, not from beside him, but somewhere ahead. "They are returning them." He slowed. The voice carried no surprise, no mystery, only quiet kindness. The bridge curved gently around a small floating garden, suspended above a sea of clouds. Wildflowers covered the soft green meadow. White daisies, golden lilies, tiny blue blossoms, no larger than raindrops. Every flower leaned gently toward the morning light. At the center of the garden stood a simple wooden bench beneath a graceful flowering tree. Its silver leaves shimmered softly whenever the birds passed overhead. Sitting peacefully upon the bench was a young woman, perhaps 19, perhaps 20. She wore a flowing dress, the color of early morning sky, embroidered with tiny golden lanterns along its sleeves. Her long chestnut hair danced gently despite the still air. Resting quietly upon her lap was an unlit lantern. She wasn't trying to light it. She simply held it with both hands, as though waiting for the right moment. When Elias approached, she offered the warmest smile, not the smile of someone greeting a stranger, nor the smile of someone expecting a guest. It was the smile of someone who believed that everyone eventually found the place they were always meant to arrive. "You must be Elias." He blinked in gentle surprise. "You know my name." She laughed softly. The sound blended so naturally with the singing birds that it almost became part of the morning itself. "The sky has been talking about you since sunrise." Elias looked upward. "The sky." She nodded. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it gets wonderfully excited when a new traveler remembers how to look up." For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. The quiet garden seemed wonderfully content to let silence make the introductions. Golden birds drifted overhead with their tiny lanterns. Some landed among the silver leaves. Others rested briefly beside clusters of blue flowers before lifting once more into the endless morning sky. Elias slowly looked toward the lantern resting upon the young woman's lap. Unlike the thousands floating above, this one remained dark, not damaged, not weathered, simply waiting. He looked back at her. "Are you returning that one too?" She lowered her eyes toward the quiet lantern. A warm smile remained upon her face. One day, she gently brushed a fingertip across its smooth wooden frame. It hasn't decided it's ready yet. The answer felt strangely familiar, not because he understood it, but because the hidden library had taught him not to hurry beautiful mysteries. He sat quietly upon the opposite end of the wooden bench. The flowering tree above them released a single silver leaf. It drifted lazily between them before disappearing into the clouds below. The young woman watched it fall. We call them sky leaves. They never land. They simply keep reminding the clouds that even letting go can be beautiful. Elias followed the disappearing leaf until it vanished completely. Everything here seemed to speak the same quiet language. Nothing struggled, nothing rushed. Even falling looked peaceful. He smiled gently. "My name is Elias." "So I know." She looked toward him with bright amber brown eyes that seemed to hold both sunlight and morning mist. "I'm Leora." The name suited her. Gentle, warm, bright without demanding attention. "I'm one of the lantern keepers." Elias looked toward the endless sky filled with floating lights. "You take care of all of them." She laughed softly. "Oh no, no one could." She looked upward with quiet admiration. "We simply welcome them." The answer made him curious. "They don't belong here. They belong everywhere." She watched another lantern slowly disappear into the blue sky. "We only help them remember." Again, the hidden library's quiet way of teaching returned. Nobody repaired the lanterns. Nobody forced them upward. Nobody decided when they should fly. They were simply given a place where remembering became easier. Elias rested both hands upon his knees. "I saw one, the lantern that never rises." Leora nodded almost immediately. "I thought you might. You noticed it before anything else." He looked surprised. "Is that unusual?" She smiled. "For most travelers, yes. They usually see the thousands already flying. You noticed the one still waiting." She did not say whether that was good or bad, only true. For a long while, they both watched the distant lantern resting peacefully above its quiet cloud. Then Leora spoke so softly that the words almost became part of the morning itself. "Would you like to meet it?" Elias turned toward her. "Can we?" She stood gracefully, lifting the unlit lantern from her lap. The sunlight touched its polished wood. For the briefest heartbeat, its tiny glass windows reflected a warm golden glow. Not from within, from the sky itself. Leora smiled. "It has been waiting much longer than you know." She stepped onto another white stone pathway, that slowly appeared among the drifting clouds. Without looking back, she knew Elias would follow, and somehow he already knew she was right. The white stone pathway curved gently through the open sky. It did not travel in a straight line. Instead, it wandered peacefully between drifting clouds, flowering islands, and quiet streams of sunlight that seemed to flow like gentle rivers through the heavens. Leora walked several steps ahead, not because she wished to lead, only because she already knew the rhythm of the sky. She never hurried, never glanced back to see whether Elias followed. The hidden library had taught her, as it had taught so many others, that trust often walked more quietly than certainty. Elias noticed something beautiful. The unlit lantern she carried was becoming ever so slightly brighter, not enough to truly glow, only enough to catch the morning light differently, almost as though the sky itself enjoyed keeping it company. He looked upward once more. The endless procession of golden lanterns continued rising peacefully. Some disappeared into soft clouds. Others drifted toward distant floating mountains, whose snowy peaks shimmered beneath the morning sun. Not one lantern followed another. Each discovered its own invisible path. No two journeys looked the same, yet together they filled the heavens with quiet harmony. "It isn't the wind," Elias whispered almost to himself. Leora smiled without turning. "No, the wind only sings. The lanterns choose." Those few words settled gently inside him. He remembered the sea of paper boats. Every paper boat had carried its own quiet journey. Now, every lantern carried its own quiet sky. The hidden library never repeated its lessons. It simply allowed one truth to bloom in different places. After a little while, the pathway widened into a broad circular terrace, resting upon a single cloud. Its floor had been crafted from smooth white stone, inlaid with tiny golden stars. Around its edge grew flowering vines that floated freely without soil, their blossoms gently opening toward the morning light. At the center of the terrace stood the lantern. It rested upon a simple wooden stand. No glass case, no ropes, no magical barrier, only quiet respect. From a distance, it appeared almost identical to every other lantern Elias had seen. Warm cedar wood, delicate brass corners, small crystal windows. Yet the closer he came, the more he sensed something different. Not weakness, not sadness, stillness, the kind of stillness found upon a lake before sunrise, or within a library just before the first page is turned. Leora stopped a respectful distance away. She lowered her own lantern, onto a nearby stone pedestal, then folded her hands peacefully before her. "We never touch it." Elias looked at her. "Never." She gently shook her head. "It has never asked us to." He slowly approached the waiting lantern. Its polished wood reflected the golden sky. Inside, a tiny flame already burned. Small, steady, beautiful. It had never gone out, for reasons he could not explain. His heart ached softly, not from sorrow, from recognition. He whispered, almost without thinking, "You've been ready all along." The little flame flickered. Only once. The blossom lantern beside Elias answered with a warm golden shimmer. Leora looked at him with quiet wonder. No traveler before him had spoken those words, and for the very first time, the waiting lantern gave the smallest, almost impossible lift, no higher than a single feather carried by a gentle breeze. Then it settled once more upon its stand, not because it had failed, but because, for the first time in a very long while, it had remembered that rising was possible. The tiny movement lasted only a heartbeat, so gentle that another traveler might have believed it had never happened at all. But Elias had seen it. Leora had seen it. Even the little golden birds circling high above suddenly became wonderfully quiet, not because they were surprised, almost as though they had been patiently waiting for that single moment. The lantern rested peacefully once again upon its wooden stand. Its small flame burned with the same calm warmth as before. Nothing dramatic had changed, and yet everything somehow had. Elias remained standing beside it. He felt no desire to lift it, no urge to discover why it had stayed behind. The hidden library had quietly taught him that beautiful questions often bloomed long before beautiful answers. He simply stood beside the waiting lantern, allowing it the same kindness every traveler had once offered him. The blossom lantern hanging at his side glowed with quiet approval. Its blossoms slowly unfolded another delicate golden petal. Leora noticed. "It likes you." Elias looked down. "I thought it only responded to the library." "It does." She smiled softly. "And you're beginning to understand the difference." He looked at her curiously. She gently pointed toward the endless sky, where thousands of lanterns continued their peaceful ascent. The hidden library was never only a place. It has always been. She paused, searching for words gentle enough to hold the truth. A way of seeing. Elias followed the rising lanterns with his eyes. For the first time, he understood. The clockmaker had not merely repaired time. The orchard had not merely grown fruit. The sea of paper boats had not merely carried hopes. Every place had quietly shown him another way to notice the world. The library had never changed the destinations. It had changed the traveler. A peaceful silence settled over the floating terrace. Then, a tiny sound drifted across the open sky. Laughter. Children's laughter. Soft, joyful, free. Elias looked toward the distant, floating islands. Across one broad meadow, dozens of children ran through fields of white cloud grass. Each carried a tiny, unlit lantern. They laughed as they chased gentle breezes that played among the flowers. None tried to light their lanterns. None seemed worried that they remained dark. They simply held them with quiet happiness. Leora smiled as she watched them. They come here every morning to learn. She nodded. Eventually, she laughed softly. But first, they learn how to wonder. Those words filled Elias with unexpected warmth. So much of life asked people to become useful. The hidden library always seemed to ask something gentler. To become present, to become kind, to become curious again. Perhaps wonder had always been the first lesson. Far above, another lantern quietly rose into the endless blue. Then another, one after another, without hurry, without competition, without fear of being left behind. Each simply rose. When it was ready, Elias looked once more toward the little lantern resting upon the wooden stand. He smiled, not because he wished to see it fly, but because he no longer doubted that one day it would. And somewhere beyond the drifting clouds, high above every floating island, the first glimpse of a magnificent city, suspended among the heavens, slowly emerged from the morning mist. Its countless towers shimmered like sunlight upon crystal. Its bridges stretched between clouds, and above them all, millions upon millions of lanterns painted the endless sky with quiet rivers of golden light. For the first time, Elias understood why this place had been given its beautiful name. It was not merely a sky filled with lanterns. It was the sky where lanterns learned to fly. The first bridge into the Sky City welcomed them with birdsong. Not loud, not distant, only close enough to feel like the morning itself had begun to sing. As Elias and Leora stepped from the quiet terrace, the white stone beneath their feet slowly widened into a graceful avenue suspended between drifting clouds. Its smooth surface shimmered faintly with threads of gold that caught the sunlight like tiny rivers flowing beneath polished marble. There were no walls, no gates, no guards waiting to ask where they had come from. Only open sky in every direction, The city trusted the heavens, and the heavens quietly carried the city in return. Ahead, the floating islands slowly gathered closer together. Individual gardens became neighborhoods. Stone pathways became elegant streets. Small cottages gave way to beautiful wooden homes whose curved rooftops were covered in flowering vines instead of tiles. Tiny waterfalls spilled from one floating island to another. Yet the water never fell into emptiness. It transformed into silver mist before reaching the clouds below, only to rise again as gentle rain somewhere far beyond the horizon. Nothing here was wasted. Even endings quietly became beginnings. Leora noticed Elias watching the waterfalls. They've never reached the ground. He smiled. Do they ever want to? She tilted her head thoughtfully. Perhaps. But they always discover another sky first. Again, the hidden library answered without explaining. The city itself slowly awakened around them. Shopkeepers opened graceful wooden windows decorated with climbing flowers. An elderly baker placed warm cloud bread upon cooling racks outside his tiny bakery. Its sweet fragrance drifted through the morning air, carrying hints of warm honey, vanilla blossoms, and fresh cream. Nearby, a young woman carefully polished dozens of tiny glass lanterns hanging outside her little workshop. She wasn't removing dust. There wasn't any. She polished them anyway, with the same quiet care someone might offer an old photograph they deeply loved. Across the street, several children sat together beneath a flowering tree, folding tiny paper lanterns from sheets that shimmered softly like moonlight. None of them spoke, yet every small smile quietly traveled from one child to another. The work itself seemed to become conversation. Elias slowed. He had expected magic. Instead, he found kindness. The Sky City did not impress visitors by being extraordinary. It welcomed them by making ordinary moments feel deeply beautiful. Leora noticed his expression and smiled. The first thing most travelers ask is where the miracles are. And where are they? She gently looked around the peaceful street. They are everywhere. She nodded toward the baker, sharing warm bread with a passing stranger. Toward the woman polishing lanterns no one had yet purchased. Toward the children, patiently helping the youngest among them fold his first tiny lantern. People usually call those little things. She smiled. The sky has always called them enough. The blossom lantern beside Elias glowed softly, not because of great magic, not because of ancient power, only because some places reminded it why it had learned to shine in the first place. They wandered without destination, And somehow, that made every path feel exactly right. The streets of the Sky City never seemed designed to lead travelers somewhere. They invited them to notice. Above every doorway hung a lantern, unlike any other. Some resembled delicate blossoms carved from pale maple wood. Others had been shaped like tiny boats, leaves, stars, feathers, or seashells. No two were alike. Elias slowed beside one that had been carved into the shape of an open book. Its pages appeared to flutter gently, despite the still morning air. It reminds me of home. Leora smiled. It should. Every family chooses the lantern that tells their story. He looked around with renewed curiosity. So every lantern is different. Every heart is. She answered so naturally that it barely sounded like wisdom. It simply sounded true. A gentle breeze wandered through the street, not strong enough to move the flowers, only strong enough to awaken the hundreds of tiny wind chimes hanging beneath balconies overhead. None were tuned alike. Some rang like crystal, others like polished wood. A few produced notes so soft they almost blended with silence itself. Yet together they formed a melody unlike any Elias had ever heard. Not written, not rehearsed, simply lived. People continued walking through the streets as though they barely noticed it. Children laughed. Shopkeepers greeted neighbors. Gardeners trimmed flowering vines. The melody belonged to everyone, so no one needed to stop and admire it. Elias listened for a long while. It never repeats. Leora nodded. Neither do mornings. Ahead, the avenue opened into a broad circular square, suspended entirely above the clouds. At its center stood an enormous tree. Its trunk shimmered with warm silver bark. Its branches stretched farther than any oak Elias had ever seen. Instead of leaves, thousands upon thousands of tiny lanterns hung from every branch. Some glowed warmly, others remained peacefully dark. None appeared forgotten, none appeared abandoned. The entire tree breathed with quiet life. Travelers approached respectfully. Some gently touched one of the lanterns before continuing on their way. Others simply stood beneath its branches with closed eyes. Nobody spoke loudly here. The silence itself seemed precious. Elias instinctively lowered his voice. "What is this place?" Leora's expression softened. "This is the listening tree." He looked upward. "It listens." She smiled. "No, it helps people hear." He looked puzzled. "Hear what?" She rested her hand lightly against the ancient silver bark. "The quiet answers that have been patiently waiting beneath all the noisy questions." Elias slowly stepped closer. He did not touch the tree, not yet. Instead, he watched an elderly man standing beneath one of its glowing lanterns. The old traveler wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't praying. He simply smiled, then quietly walked away, looking somehow lighter than when he had arrived. Elias felt the same gentle warmth he had felt beside the wishing tree. The clockmaker's wing, the sea of paper boats, different places, different wonders, yet always the same quiet invitation to become just a little more present, just a little more grateful, just a little more himself. As he stood beneath the silver branches, one tiny lantern hanging high above gently brightened, only for a moment, only enough to catch his eye. Leora noticed it too. She did not explain why it had happened. She simply whispered, "It remembers you." And somehow, deep within his heart, Elias wondered if perhaps he was beginning to remember it too. They remained beneath the listening tree for a little while longer, not because there was more to see, but because some places quietly asked to be experienced before they were understood. A silver leaf drifted gently from one of the high branches. Instead of falling, it floated toward Elias with the slow certainty of a feather finding still water. He raised his hand instinctively. The leaf settled softly upon his palm. It felt warm, not with heat, with familiarity, almost as though someone had remembered his name without speaking it aloud. He looked toward Leora. "It chose you." She smiled. "No, it recognized something." Before Elias could ask what she meant, the delicate silver leaf slowly dissolved into dozens of tiny points of golden light. They circled once around the blossom lantern hanging at his side, then quietly disappeared into the morning air. Nothing remained in his hand. Yet strangely, he did not feel as though he had lost anything. Instead, he carried the quiet certainty that something had just been given. Not an object, a reminder. Leora began walking once more. The listening tree never keeps souvenirs. It gives memories back to the people who already carry them. Elias followed beside her. The hidden library does that often. She looked toward him with quiet curiosity. It doesn't give answers. It helps people remember them. Her smile widened. "I wondered how long it would take you to notice." The streets gradually became busier. Not crowded, simply more alive. Travelers from many different places wandered peacefully through the floating city. Some wore long mountain cloaks woven from soft gray wool. Others dressed in flowing robes that shimmered like river water beneath sunlight. A family crossed one graceful bridge, carrying baskets overflowing with glowing flowers. Nearby, an elderly musician sat comfortably upon a small wooden stool. Instead of strings, his instrument held delicate strands of light stretched between polished cedar wood. Each gentle movement of his fingers released warm golden notes that floated through the air like tiny birds before quietly dissolving into sunlight. Children gathered nearby, not because they had been invited, because beautiful things naturally gathered company. One little girl closed her eyes as she listened. Her tiny lantern, which had remained dark until now, slowly flickered. Only once, the elderly musician noticed. He did not congratulate her. He simply continued playing, as though lanterns learning to shine were among the most ordinary things in the world. Elias smiled softly. No one here seems surprised by miracles. Leora laughed. They stop becoming miracles once they become part of daily life. They continued walking until the streets gently opened toward the highest point of the floating city. There, resting upon a broad island surrounded by endless sky, stood a magnificent circular building, unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Its walls had been built almost entirely of crystal. Its graceful roof appeared woven from silver branches that opened toward the heavens like an enormous flower welcoming the morning sun. Thousands of lanterns floated peacefully above it. None landed, none drifted away. They simply circled the building in slow, graceful silence. At the very top, a single lantern shone brighter than all the others, not because it was larger, because its light seemed wonderfully alive. Leora stopped. Her expression became quietly respectful. She folded her hands before her. Elias instinctively did the same. What is this place? For the first time since entering the sky, Leora answered with something that sounded almost like reverence. This, she whispered, is the house of first light. The name itself seemed to settle gently into the morning, and somewhere inside the crystal halls, a single bell rang, softly, patiently, almost, as though it had been waiting for Elias to arrive. The house of first light stood in complete stillness, not silent, still, as though every beam of crystal, every silver branch, every floating lantern had quietly agreed to breathe together. Elias remained at the foot of the broad, white steps. He felt no urgency to climb them. The hidden library had slowly taught him that sacred places were never entered quickly. They were entered gratefully. A gentle breeze wandered across the high island. For the first time since arriving in the sky, he noticed that the air carried a faint golden fragrance. It reminded him of warm cedar, fresh linen, and the quiet scent that lingers after someone blows out a candle at the end of a peaceful evening. Leora smiled. "You smell it." Elias nodded. "It feels." He searched for words. "Familiar." "It should." She looked toward the crystal hall. "This is where every lantern keeper receives their first light." He turned toward her. "Not their first lantern." She gently shook her head. "No, the lantern comes later. The light always comes first." Again, the sky quietly reversed everything Elias thought he understood. He had imagined that lanterns created light. Here, light patiently waited for a home. They slowly climbed the broad staircase together. Each step had been carved from smooth white stone that reflected the sky like still water. Neither of them spoke. Even conversation seemed unnecessary. Above them, the thousands of circling lanterns continued their graceful dance around the crystal roof. None collided. None hurried. Every movement felt perfectly understood. When they reached the entrance, Elias noticed something extraordinary. There were no doors, only a wide circular opening, framed by living silver branches, whose blossoms glowed softly like tiny stars. People entered quietly. People left quietly. Nothing separated the house from the sky. The boundary simply did not exist. Inside, the hall opened into a breathtaking circle beneath an impossibly high crystal dome. Warm morning light poured gently through the transparent ceiling. Yet instead of creating shadows, it seemed to soften everything it touched. Hundreds of lantern keepers moved peacefully through the great hall. Some polished lanterns, already glowing with warm golden light. Others carefully repaired tiny wooden frames, worn smooth by countless journeys. Several quietly comforted young children, holding their very first lanterns. No one issued instructions. No one appeared to supervise. Everyone simply noticed where kindness was needed and walked there. Elias smiled. "It feels like the library." Leora's eyes brightened. The sky learned from the library long before either of us arrived. At the center of the hall stood an enormous circular pool. Its surface was perfectly still. No fountain disturbed it. No ripple crossed its mirror-like water. Suspended above the center of the pool floated a single golden flame. No lantern surrounded it. No candle held it. It simply hovered peacefully above the water. Small, steady, timeless. Elias stopped without realizing it. His breathing slowed. The little flame felt strangely older than memory itself. Leora lowered her voice until it became almost a whisper. "Every lantern in the sky begins here." Elias looked at the tiny floating flame. "So this lights them all." She smiled softly. "No, it reminds them." He looked at her. "Reminds them of what?" Leora's eyes never left the quiet flame. "That light has never belonged to the lantern." Silence gently settled between them. Not empty silence, the kind that allows one simple truth to find its own place inside the heart. And as Elias stood before the first light, the blossom lantern hanging beside him glowed brighter than ever before. Not brilliantly, not loudly, only enough for one more golden blossom to quietly unfold. The little golden flame remained perfectly still. It did not dance. It did not flicker. It simply existed, as though it had forgotten what it meant to fear the wind. Elias stood quietly beside the circular pool. For reasons he could not explain, he felt no desire to step closer. Some lights invited admiration. Others invited reverence. This one invited neither. It simply welcomed presence. Around the great hall, the lantern keepers continued their gentle work. One elderly woman carefully wrapped a newly finished lantern inside soft linen before placing it into the hands of a smiling traveler. Nearby, two young apprentices polished tiny brass hinges while quietly laughing together. A little boy proudly carried his very first lantern across the crystal floor. It remained completely dark, yet he held it with such joy that it already seemed wonderfully alive. Nobody told him it needed to shine. Nobody hurried its first light. The house itself seemed to understand that every beginning arrived at its own peaceful hour. Liara slowly walked toward the still pool. She did not touch the floating flame. Instead, she rested one hand lightly above her heart. Every lantern keeper nearby did exactly the same. No words were spoken. No ceremony began. The hall simply became quietly grateful. Elias followed their example as his hand settled gently over his heart. The blossom lantern beside him released a warm golden glow, not outward, inward. Its light seemed to flow gently through him rather than around him. He closed his eyes. For one peaceful moment, he remembered every place the hidden library had already carried him. The clockmaker's quiet smile, the river of floating lanterns, the garden of forgotten dreams, the tea house between seasons, the valley of silent bells, the sea of paper boats. None of the memories competed. None asked to be remembered first. They rested together like lanterns already shining inside the same sky. When Elias opened his eyes again, the little golden flame remained exactly as it had been. Yet something inside him had quietly changed. Leora noticed. The first light never gives people anything. He looked toward her. It doesn't. She gently shook her head. It simply helps them notice how much light they were already carrying. Elias smiled. Some lessons could never be written inside books. They had to be lived. A gentle bell echoed somewhere high within the crystal dome. This time, it was answered, not by another bell, by hundreds of tiny lanterns throughout the great hall. One after another, they softly brightened. Some belonged to travelers preparing for long journeys. Others rested quietly beside families. Several hung above workbenches where lantern keepers patiently repaired old wooden frames. No command had been given. No signal had been announced. The lanterns had simply chosen the same moment. Elias watched them with quiet wonder. They're speaking. Leora's eyes sparkled. They are listening. He laughed softly. I still have so much to learn. She smiled. So does every lantern keeper. She looked toward the open sky beyond the crystal hall. The beautiful thing is, the sky never expects anyone to finish. At that very moment, a tiny golden bird flew gracefully through the open entrance. Instead of landing, it circled Elias once, then settled gently upon the railing, overlooking the endless clouds. A tiny rolled ribbon of pale blue silk rested beneath one delicate wing. The bird chirped once, softly, patiently. Leora's smile widened. It seems the wind garden has sent for us, far beyond the crystal halls, beyond the floating villages, beyond even the highest bridges. Elias caught his very first glimpse of something extraordinary, an entire forest growing upon the clouds, not trees of wood, trees woven entirely from flowing wind and shimmering light. Their branches moved without breeze. Their leaves sang without sound. And above every graceful crown, thousands of young lanterns floated quietly, waiting for the day they would learn how to fly. The journey to the wind garden began without leaving the city. The crystal halls slowly disappeared behind them, not because they had walked very far, but because the sky gently knew when it was time for one wonder to make room for another. The white stone pathway became narrower. Its polished surface slowly softened beneath their feet until it resembled smooth, woven grass made from silver threads of light. It bent gracefully through floating meadows where cloud flowers swayed without wind. Above them, young lanterns drifted lazily between the branches of invisible currents. Unlike the lanterns Elias had seen earlier, these moved differently. Some rose confidently, some wandered in wide circles, others gently drifted back toward the trees from which they had come, almost like young birds discovering their wings. Elias watched one little lantern attempt to climb higher. It floated several feet upward, paused, then quietly drifted back down again. No one hurried to rescue it. No lantern keeper frowned. No voice whispered that it had failed. The little lantern simply rested among the branches before trying once more. Leora noticed his smile. They always try again. They are learning. She nodded. They are listening. He laughed softly. Everything here listens. She looked upward. The wind teaches differently than the sea. The sea teaches patience. The sky teaches trust. They continued climbing. With every gentle step, the air became lighter, cooler, brighter. The floating islands gradually disappeared beneath soft white clouds, until Elias realized they were now walking higher than almost everything he had seen since entering the sky. Far below, the floating villages resembled tiny warm stars scattered across an endless ocean of cloud. The house of first light shimmered peacefully in the distance. Its crystal dome reflected the morning sun like a single enormous dewdrop resting upon heaven itself. Ahead, the first trees slowly appeared. At first, Elias thought they had no leaves, only graceful silver branches stretching elegantly into the open sky. But as sunlight gently touched them, he realized the branches were covered with countless tiny ribbons of light. They floated instead of growing. Every delicate ribbon danced gently through the air, despite there being no breeze at all. The trees themselves seemed woven from moving wind. No trunk remained completely solid. Soft currents of pale blue, silver, and warm gold continuously flowed through the wood, as though the forest quietly breathed with the sky itself. Between the trees, young lanterns drifted peacefully, hundreds, perhaps thousands, not hanging, not resting, simply floating, waiting, learning. The tiny golden bird who had carried the pale blue ribbon flew ahead of them. It landed upon the highest silver branch, then chirped once. Instantly, the entire forest answered. Thousands of ribbons of light began moving together, not wildly, not dramatically, only enough to create the gentlest whisper Elias had ever heard. It sounded almost like pages turning inside a distant library, or quiet laughter carried across sleeping fields. The sound wrapped around him like warm morning sunlight. He closed his eyes for just a moment. The blossom lantern glowed softly beside him, not because it recognized the forest, because the forest had recognized it. Leora whispered so quietly that the whisper itself seemed careful not to disturb the trees. "Welcome to the wind garden." The wind garden welcomed them without a single gate. No stone entrance marked where it began. No sign announced its name. The forest simply became part of the sky. As Elias stepped beneath the first silver branches, he noticed something extraordinary. The air itself seemed alive, not with movement, with intention. Gentle currents drifted between the trees, weaving through every branch with the quiet grace of invisible rivers. Wherever they passed, the ribbons of light hanging from the branches awakened. Some shimmered softly, others danced playfully. A few simply swayed, as though greeting an old friend. The tiny golden bird fluttered ahead, hopping from branch to branch before disappearing deeper into the forest. Leora smiled. "It knows the way. Does it always? It never gets lost." She looked upward. None of the birds do. Elias watched several more birds gliding effortlessly through the flowing currents. Not once did they flap their wings in panic. They trusted the unseen paths completely. It reminded him of something Rowan had once quietly taught him beside the river, of floating lanterns. Some journeys become easier the moment we stop trying to control the current. The hidden library had a beautiful habit. Its lessons never ended. They simply returned, wearing different faces. The pathway beneath their feet gradually softened until it resembled moss woven from clouds. Every step produced the faintest whisper, not from the ground, from the wind itself. At first, Elias thought it was only imagination. Then, he realized he could almost hear words, not sentences, only tiny fragments carried gently through the air. "Welcome. Thank you. Beautiful, safe." The voices came and went like distant memories, never loud enough to interrupt silence, only gentle enough to accompany it. Elias slowed. "Can you hear them?" Leora nodded. The wind remembers kind words. He looked around the forest. The wind remembers. She rested her fingertips against one flowing ribbon of light. It immediately brightened with warm golden color. Nothing truly kind is ever lost. Some kindness stays inside people. Some become stories. And some, she smiled softly, chooses to travel forever. The ribbon slowly released a tiny golden spark. It drifted upward before joining hundreds of others, dancing peacefully between the branches. The entire forest glittered with thousands of tiny lights, almost like stars had decided to live among the trees. Further ahead, they reached a quiet clearing. Unlike the rest of the forest, this place contained no lanterns at all, only 7 young trees arranged in a gentle circle. Each tree looked different. One shimmered pale blue, another glowed warm amber, one carried silver blossoms, another held tiny emerald leaves that gently chimed whenever invisible currents passed through them. Yet, the 7th tree stood completely bare. No ribbons, no blossoms, no lanterns, only graceful silver branches reaching patiently toward the endless sky. Elias looked at it for a long moment. "It isn't finished." Leora's smile became wonderfully gentle. "Oh, it is." He looked back at her. "It simply hasn't been introduced to the wind that belongs to it yet, for reasons he couldn't explain." Those words settled deeply inside him. Perhaps people weren't so different. Some journeys bloomed quickly. Others waited, not because they were forgotten, but because their season had not yet quietly arrived. The 7 young trees stood quietly beneath the endless sky. None reached higher than the others. None appeared more beautiful. Each simply grew according to its own gentle rhythm. Elias slowly walked around the circle. As he passed each tree, he noticed something wonderfully different. The pale blue tree released tiny ribbons of light that drifted upward like slow-moving streams. The amber tree carried warm golden leaves, shaped almost like little lantern flames. The silver-blossomed tree filled the air with the faint fragrance of fresh rain. Another tree shimmered softly whenever the distant wind chimes echoed across the floating forest. Every tree possessed its own quiet personality. None tried to become another. At last, Elias stopped before the 7th tree. Its silver branches stretched gracefully toward the heavens, completely bare, yet somehow it felt no less alive than the others. He looked at Leora. "Has it always been like this?" She gently shook her head. "No, it simply hasn't met its wind." He smiled softly. "I still don't understand." "I know." She stepped closer to the quiet tree and rested her fingertips lightly against its smooth silver trunk. "It took me many years to understand too." For several peaceful moments, she simply stood there. Then she began speaking so softly that even the forest seemed to lean closer. "When lantern keepers are very young, we believe the wind belongs to everyone." She smiled, and in many ways, it does. But as we grow, each of us slowly discovers one current that understands our light better than any other. Elias listened carefully. The currents aren't different because the wind changes. They are different because— She looked toward him warmly. "People do. words settled gently inside him. He remembered the sea of paper boats. Every boat had followed its own quiet current. Now, every lantern followed its own quiet sky. Perhaps the hidden library had been showing him the same truth all along, not through repetition, through deeper understanding. Just then, the tiny golden bird returned. It fluttered down onto one of the bare silver branches. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the little bird closed its eyes. It sang, not loudly, not beautifully, in the ordinary sense. Its song was so simple that Elias almost mistook it for silence. 3 gentle notes. Nothing more, the bare tree answered. One tiny silver ribbon slowly appeared upon its highest branch, no larger than a blade of grass. It shimmered softly in the morning light. Then another appeared, and another, not all at once, patiently, as though the tree itself had been quietly waiting for someone to remind it that it already knew how to grow. Elias watched in quiet amazement. The bird did that. Leora smiled. No, the tree did. The bird simply reminded it that it wasn't growing alone. Those words touched something deep inside Elias. How many times had someone quietly done the same for him? The clockmaker, the map maker, the keeper of the tea house, Elara. None of them had changed his path. None had carried him forward. Each had simply reminded him that he already possessed the courage to keep walking. The blossom lantern hanging beside him glowed warmly. Its newest golden blossom slowly opened a little farther, not because of magic, because recognition had quietly become gratitude. Far beyond the silver branches, the invisible currents of the wind garden shifted ever so gently. The ribbons of light throughout the forest began flowing toward a distant hill. Not quickly, not urgently, almost as though the entire garden had just heard someone whisper, "It's time." Leora looked toward the moving currents. Her smile carried the quiet excitement of someone greeting an old friend. "I think," she whispered, "the wind weaver is ready to meet you." The currents gathered with quiet purpose, not rushing, not pulling, simply inviting. Thousands of ribbons of light drifted through the wind garden in the same graceful direction. The young lanterns floating among the trees slowly followed them. None resisted, none hurried ahead. The entire forest seemed to move together, like a single peaceful breath. Leora began walking once more. This only happens a few times each day. Elias followed beside her. What does? The listening of the wind. He smiled. The wind listens too. She laughed softly. "I told you, everything listens here." The path curved gently upward through the heart of the forest. The trees slowly grew taller. Their flowing branches stretched farther into the open sky until they formed a living canopy woven entirely from silver light. Warm sunlight filtered through the ribbons above, painting quiet patterns across the cloud-soft ground. Every step felt wonderfully light, as though the forest gently carried those who entered with peaceful hearts. Ahead, the ribbons of light slowly separated. A broad circular clearing appeared among the trees, unlike every other place Elias had seen. This clearing held no flowers, no lanterns, no birds, only wind. Soft streams of invisible air flowed continuously through the open space, crossing one another with perfect harmony. Although Elias could not see them directly, he could see their touch. Tiny golden seeds floated gracefully through the clearing, rising and falling as each current gently welcomed them. Some drifted high into the morning sky. Others circled lazily before settling once again upon the clouds. Not one seed ever collided with another. Every current somehow knew exactly where each tiny traveler belonged. At the center of the clearing stood an elderly woman. She appeared neither old nor young, simply timeless. Her long silver hair flowed almost to the ground, moving gently with the invisible currents around her. She wore simple robes woven from pale blue and soft white threads that shimmered like morning mist. In her hands rested not a lantern, not a staff, only a single white feather. She held it so lightly that it almost seemed to float above her open palms. She did not move, yet somehow the entire clearing seemed to move with her. The currents bent gracefully around her without effort. The ribbons in the distant trees answered her quiet presence. Even the tiny golden seeds drifting through the air appeared calmer nearby. Leora stopped several steps away. She placed one hand gently above her heart. The wind weaver, Elias instinctively did the same. The elderly woman slowly opened her eyes. They were the gentle gray of clouds just before sunrise. When they settled upon Elias, they carried neither surprise nor curiosity, only recognition, as though she had expected him long before he had begun this journey. Her warm smile appeared so naturally that it felt like sunrise quietly finding the horizon. "So," she whispered, "the library has finally sent the traveler who still knows how to wait." Elias blinked gently. "You are expecting me." She tilted her head ever so slightly. "I was expecting whoever the wind chose." She lifted the single white feather resting upon her palms. Without releasing it, she simply breathed. The feather rose into the air, no stronger than the movement of a sleeping child's breath. It floated peacefully before Elias, hovering at eye level. "Tell me," the wind weaver asked softly, "if I gave you this feather, where would you carry it?" Elias looked at the tiny feather dancing gently before him. He thought for a long while, not searching for the right answer, simply listening. At last, he smiled. "I wouldn't carry it." The wind weaver's eyes quietly brightened. "I would walk beside it until it found the sky that was already waiting for it." Silence gently settled across the clearing. Then, the invisible currents surrounding them grew just a little warmer. The tiny golden seeds shimmered brighter. Far above, hundreds of young lanterns rose together, not because they had been lifted, but because, for one beautiful moment, they had all remembered how to trust the wind. The feather continued floating peacefully between them. It never touched the ground. It never drifted away. It simply rested upon the quiet breath of the wind garden. The wind weaver watched it with gentle eyes. Then she smiled. The library was right. Elias looked at her. "About what?" She stepped forward, moving so softly that even the golden seeds continued their peaceful dance around her. "It said," she paused, her voice becoming almost as light as the feather itself, "that you had finally stopped trying to carry everything alone." For a moment, Elias said nothing. He remembered the beginning of his journey, when every mystery had felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved, when every beautiful place had seemed like something to understand. Now, he simply allowed himself to be present. Perhaps that was why the hidden library had opened another doorway, not because he had found every answer, because he had learned to stop chasing them. The wind weaver gently lifted one hand. The feather slowly turned once in the air. Without warning, it separated into 7 tiny feathers, each no larger than a single blossom petal. The little feathers floated outward. One settled beside the pale blue tree. Another drifted toward the amber branches. Others quietly disappeared among the flowing ribbons of light. Only one remained. It hovered gently before Elias. He made no attempt to catch it. Instead, he simply watched. The tiny feather slowly descended, not into his hand, onto the blossom lantern. The newest golden blossom welcomed it without a sound. The feather dissolved into warm light. The blossom glowed brighter than before, not brighter than the lantern itself, only brighter than it had ever been. Leora smiled quietly. The garden remembers. Elias looked toward her. What does it remember? The moments when someone chooses trust instead of fear. The wind weaver nodded. That is how every lantern keeper begins. Elias looked around the peaceful forest. I thought lantern keepers learned to care for lanterns. They do. She smiled warmly. But first, they learn never to steal the journey from another traveler. Those words settled deeply inside him. He remembered Leora. She had never answered every question. She had never hurried him toward understanding. She had simply walked beside him. Just enough, no more, no less. The same kindness Rowan had once offered. The same patience Alara had quietly carried. Perhaps that was how the hidden library protected its travelers, not by showing them the way, by trusting them to discover it. A warm current flowed gently through the clearing. For the first time, the young lanterns drifting among the trees began rising higher. Not all of them, only a few, one after another. They left the shelter of the wind garden and climbed peacefully toward the endless heavens. None looked afraid. None looked uncertain. They simply rose because the moment had quietly arrived. The wind weaver watched them disappear into the bright morning sky. They've learned enough for today. She turned toward Elias. So have you. He smiled softly. I don't feel as though I've learned very much. She laughed, a warm, gentle laugh that blended perfectly with the whispering forest. The deepest lessons rarely feel heavy. They feel. She looked upward toward the rising lanterns, lighter, far beyond the silver trees. The clouds slowly began changing color. Morning blue softened into warm gold. Long streams of sunlight stretched across the heavens like quiet rivers of light. Somewhere in the distance, a single bell echoed through the sky city. Then another, then dozens more answered together. Not as a warning, not as an announcement, as an invitation. Leora looked toward the glowing horizon with bright, hopeful eyes. The evening ascent is beginning. Elias followed her gaze. Above the distant city, more lanterns were gathering than he had ever imagined possible. The sky itself seemed ready to bloom with light. The bells did not announce the evening ascent. They invited it. Soft notes drifted across the sky city like warm ripples spreading across a perfectly still lake. No two bells rang together. Each waited until the previous note had found its quiet place within the air. Then another answered, and another, until the entire sky seemed gently alive with peaceful music. Elias and Leora slowly descended from the wind garden. The silver pathways glowed with the warm colors of late afternoon. The endless blue above had begun its gentle transformation. Hints of amber rested along the horizon. Soft shades of rose drifted through distant clouds. Far below, the floating villages slowly awakened once again, not because they had been asleep, because evening was their favorite time to remember beauty together. Every home opened its windows. Tiny lanterns appeared upon balconies. Children carried little wooden stools into quiet gardens. Families gathered beneath flowering trees. No one hurried. Nobody looked toward clocks. The sky measured evenings differently. It measured them by togetherness. As they entered the city once more, Elias noticed that everyone carried something in their hands. Some held lanterns, already glowing with warm golden light. Others carried lanterns that remained peacefully dark. An elderly man carefully polished the small glass window of his lantern while smiling to himself. A little girl hugged hers against her chest, as though holding a favorite storybook. Two sisters quietly exchanged lanterns for a moment, only to laugh and return them. Every lantern somehow reflected its owner. Different shapes, different colors, different stories, yet everyone belonged. Elias looked around with quiet wonder. Where is everyone going? Leora smiled. Up. He laughed softly. I can see that. She looked toward the slowly darkening heavens. No. She whispered higher. Ahead, the streets gradually merged into one magnificent avenue, stretching toward the highest floating island in the Sky City. Thousands of travelers walked together, yet no crowd formed. Everyone naturally found enough space for one another. There were no hurried footsteps, no pushing, no anxious voices, only peaceful conversation carried gently through the cooling evening air. The atmosphere reminded Elias of something. Not the hidden library, not the sea of paper boats, home, not a particular place, a feeling, the kind that quietly whispers, you already belong here. Beside him, Leora's smile had grown quieter. She no longer looked toward the people. Her eyes remained fixed upon the lantern she carried, still unlit, still beautiful, still waiting. Elias noticed the way her fingers gently tightened around its smooth wooden frame, only slightly, just enough for someone who had learned to notice small things. He did not ask why. The wind weaver's words still rested peacefully within his heart. Never steal the journey from another traveler. Some questions needed company before they needed answers. For several peaceful minutes, they simply walked together beneath a sky slowly filling with stars. Then, without looking away from her lantern, Leora spoke. So many people think. She smiled faintly. That tonight is about teaching lanterns to fly. Elias looked toward the thousands thousands of glowing lights slowly gathering above the city. Isn't it? She gently shook her head. No. Her voice became wonderfully soft. Tonight, the lanterns teach us. Leora's words lingered gently between them. Tonight, the lanterns teach us. Elias repeated them silently. The evening avenue continued climbing toward the highest island, where the entire sky city seemed to be gathering with quiet anticipation. Above, the first stars had begun appearing, not suddenly, one at a time, patiently, as though even the heavens preferred gentle beginnings. The crowds around them slowly grew quieter. Children who had laughed moments before now walked peacefully beside their families. Conversations softened. Even the little golden birds carrying miniature lanterns flew lower, their tiny wings almost soundless against the cooling air. Nobody had asked for silence. It simply arrived. Like evening itself, ahead, the avenue opened into an enormous circular terrace, overlooking the endless sea of clouds. Elias stopped without realizing it. The view stretched farther than imagination. Floating islands shimmered beneath the deepening twilight. Silver rivers of cloud reflected the first stars. The distant house of first light glowed softly, like a single peaceful heartbeat resting within the heavens. And surrounding the entire terrace stood thousands upon thousands of lantern keepers, not arranged in rows, not organized into ceremony, simply gathered together like old friends who had always known where to meet. No platform waited at the center, no throne, no leader, only open sky. Leora quietly joined the others. She gently placed her unlit lantern before her. Every lantern keeper did the same. Some lanterns glowed warmly. Others remained dark. No difference seemed to matter. Every lantern received exactly the same welcome. Elias noticed an elderly lantern keeper standing nearby. His lantern was old. Its cedar frame had been repaired many times. Small brass corners no longer matched one another. The crystal windows carried tiny scratches gathered across countless journeys. Yet, the old man smiled at it with unmistakable affection. A little boy stood beside him, holding a brand new lantern, polished so perfectly it reflected the evening stars. The elderly man looked toward the child, then quietly placed his weathered lantern beside the new one. For several moments, they simply admired both together. Neither looked better, neither looked worse. One carried many years, the other carried many tomorrows. Both belonged equally beneath the same sky. Elias felt warmth quietly settle inside his heart. Here, nothing became more valuable because because it was newer. Nothing became less beautiful because time had gently touched it. The sky remembered every journey with kindness. A soft breeze wandered across the terrace. The thousands of lanterns responded together. Tiny flames swayed gently. Glass windows caught the growing starlight. Warm reflections danced across peaceful faces. Then, without warning, every lantern keeper slowly lifted their lantern. Not high, only to the height of their own heart. Nobody looked upward. Nobody watched the sky. Instead, every traveler quietly looked into the light they were already holding. Leora did the same. Her lantern remained dark, yet she smiled at it with exactly the same tenderness as everyone else. Elias looked toward her. Something inside him gently whispered, "Tonight was never about making a lantern fly. It was about learning to love it before it ever did." And for the very first time since they had met, he saw the smallest shadow pass across Leora's peaceful eyes. It vanished almost immediately, so quickly that another traveler might never have noticed it. But Elias had learned that the quietest moments often carried the deepest stories. He said nothing. He simply stood beside her, exactly as the wind weaver had taught him, not trying to carry her journey, only making sure she never had to walk it alone. The first lantern rose so quietly that no one could say exactly when it had left its owner's hands. One moment, it rested gently before an elderly woman whose silver hair shimmered beneath the evening stars. The next, it floated peacefully upward, no faster than a drifting leaf, no brighter than before. It simply trusted the sky. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. The woman merely smiled, then folded her hands together with quiet gratitude. A second lantern followed, then another. Soon, tiny golden lights began rising across the vast terrace, like gentle fireflies discovering the heavens. Each chose its own moment. Each found its own invisible current. No lantern imitated another. No lantern hurried because others had already begun. The sky welcomed every journey exactly when it arrived. Elias watched them in silent wonder. It felt less like watching lanterns fly and more like watching thousands of hearts quietly exhale. Beside him, Leora continued, holding her lantern close. Its wooden frame rested peacefully against her hands. Its crystal windows reflected the countless lights climbing into the evening sky. Yet inside, there was still only quiet darkness. She never looked away from it, not with sadness, not with frustration, only with a tenderness so deep that it almost resembled love. Elias remembered the little lantern resting alone upon the cloud on his first day here, waiting, not broken, only waiting. Perhaps, he thought, Leora had been waiting too. A little girl standing nearby suddenly gasped with delight. "My lantern." Her father looked upward. The tiny lantern she had carried all afternoon had begun rising gently into the twilight. She laughed with pure happiness. Then, instead of chasing after it, she waved, "Have a beautiful journey." The little lantern continued climbing, higher, higher, until it became another golden star among thousands. Elias smiled. She had not tried to keep it. She had thanked it. The hidden library had quietly shown him many beautiful endings. This was the gentlest farewell he had ever witnessed. The wind weaver's words returned once again. Light has never belonged to the lantern. He finally understood. People often believed the miracle happened when a lantern began to fly. The people of the sky knew differently. The miracle happened when someone loved the lantern enough to let it go. A soft breath of wind wandered across the terrace. Hundreds more lanterns answered together. Golden rivers slowly began flowing upward through the deep blue evening. The stars themselves seemed to make room. Every traveler watched peacefully. No one counted. No one compared. Every ascent was equally beautiful. Every journey equally worthy. Then, very quietly, Leora whispered, "Not tonight." The words were so soft, they almost disappeared into the evening breeze. But Elias heard them. He looked toward her. She was smiling, the same warm smile she had worn all day. Only now, he could see what rested quietly beneath it. Hope, patient, faithful, unwavering hope. She gently brushed her thumb across the smooth wooden frame of her lantern. Maybe tomorrow. She wasn't asking the sky. She wasn't asking the lantern. She was simply offering both, all the time they needed. Elias felt no desire to comfort her, no desire to promise that tomorrow would come. Some promises belonged to the heart, not to words. So he did the only thing the hidden library had been teaching him since the beginning of his journey. He remained beside her, and together they watched the sky continue filling with light. The evening sky had become a living river of light. Thousands of lanterns floated upward with quiet grace, weaving gentle golden pathways among the first stars. No current crossed another. No light dimmed its neighbor. Every lantern carried enough sky, and the sky never seemed to grow full. Elias slowly lifted his eyes. He suddenly understood why no one here ever spoke of losing a lantern. Nothing was lost, Everything simply became part of something larger. A familiar warmth settled quietly within his heart, the same warmth he had first felt when stepping into the hidden library, not because the places were alike, because they both carried the same quiet promise. Nothing beautiful was ever truly left behind. As they continued watching, a soft voice spoke nearby. "Would you help me?" Elias turned. Standing only a few steps away was a small boy, perhaps 8 years old. His curly dark hair danced gently in the evening breeze. Both hands carefully cradled a tiny lantern carved from pale maple wood. It remained unlit, unlike the children Elias had seen earlier. This little boy wasn't smiling. He wasn't frightened either, only thoughtful. Elias knelt until they were almost eye level. Of course, the boy looked down at his lantern. "I've been talking to it all day. It still doesn't want to fly." Elias smiled gently. "What have you been telling it?" The boy thought carefully. "I told it that the sky is beautiful. I told it that everyone else is already going. I even told it that I'd miss it." He sighed softly, "But it still stays." For a moment, Elias simply looked at the little lantern. Its tiny crystal windows reflected hundreds of golden lights climbing into the heavens. It looked peaceful, not reluctant, not afraid, simply patient. The wind weaver's lesson quietly returned. Never steal the journey from another traveler. He looked back at the boy. "What if—" He spoke slowly enough for the words to arrive gently. "Your lantern already knows all those things." The little boy blinked. "What do you mean?" Elias smiled. "Maybe it doesn't need someone to convince it. Maybe it only needs someone who believes it will know when it's ready." The boy looked down again. His little hands relaxed around the smooth wooden frame. He nodded very slowly. Then something beautiful happened. He stopped looking at the sky. Instead, he looked only at his lantern, not waiting, not hoping, simply smiling at it. "As long as you need." He whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Silence settled gently around them. No magic burst across the terrace. No brilliant light appeared. The little lantern remained exactly where it was. Yet somehow, it no longer felt as though it had failed to fly. It felt understood. The boy smiled wider than before. "Thank you." He hugged the lantern carefully against his chest before happily returning to his family. Leora had watched everything. She stepped quietly beside Elias. "You never told him it would fly." He gently shook his head. "I didn't know that." She smiled warmly. "But you helped him stop asking it to become someone else's lantern. Elias looked upward once more. Perhaps that had always been the hidden library's quietest miracle. Not changing people, helping them believe they were already enough, while becoming who they were meant to be. Above them, another lantern slowly left its traveler's hands, and another, until the evening itself seemed to bloom, like a garden planted entirely with stars. The stars continued arriving one by one. Above them, the sky no longer felt distant. It felt welcoming. Golden lanterns drifted peacefully among the constellations, until it became impossible to tell where starlight ended and lantern light began. Perhaps they had never truly been separate. A gentle hush settled across the great terrace, not because every lantern had risen. Many still rested quietly within caring hands. The silence came from something far gentler. Gratitude. Thousands of hearts sharing one peaceful moment together, without anyone asking. Everyone slowly turned toward the open horizon. Beyond the floating islands, the last colors of sunset faded into deep sapphire blue. One bright evening star appeared first, then another, then an entire river of stars slowly unfolded across the heavens. The lantern keepers watched in quiet contentment. No one spoke. Some moments became smaller. When words tried to hold them, Elias noticed Leora looking toward the first evening star. Her lantern still rested gently against her heart. Its little flame had not appeared. Its crystal windows remained dark. Yet, her smile had never looked more peaceful. He quietly stepped beside her. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. After a long while, Leora spoke. When I was very young, I used to think the lantern was waiting for me. She laughed softly at the memory. I polished it. I carried it everywhere. I whispered stories to it before I slept. I even apologized whenever I thought I had disappointed it. Elias listened quietly. Then one day, an old lantern keeper smiled and asked me a question. She looked upward. He asked, "What if your lantern has never been waiting for you?" Elias smiled. What did he mean? She rested one gentle hand upon the smooth cedar frame. He said, "Perhaps it has simply been walking beside you until you no longer needed to wonder whether you were enough." The words floated gently between them. Elias felt the truth of them before he fully understood them. Perhaps that was why the little lantern on the cloud had never risen. Perhaps that was why the first light had never hurried anyone. Perhaps that was why the wind garden had never forced a single lantern into the sky. The hidden library had never believed that love could be rushed. Neither did the sky. Far above, one tiny lantern suddenly appeared between two bright stars. It rose alone, slowly, peacefully. No traveler claimed it. No family waved goodbye. It simply continued climbing until its golden glow blended almost perfectly with the heavens. Leora watched it disappear. Then, very quietly, she smiled. Someone found their moment. Elias followed the tiny light until he could no longer tell it apart from the stars. "I think," he whispered, "the stars look happier tonight." Leora laughed softly. Perhaps they enjoy making new friends. The little golden birds, carrying miniature lanterns, began circling gently above the gathered lantern keepers. One by one, they settled upon nearby branches. Even they seemed ready for evening. The bells rang once more. Only once. Their warm note drifted across the floating city before dissolving into peaceful silence. Nobody hurried home. Nobody rushed to leave. People simply gathered their lanterns, whether glowing or dark, and slowly began walking together beneath the starlit sky. Every lantern was carried with the same tenderness. Every traveler wore the same quiet smile, because tonight had never been about proving anything. It had simply been about remembering that every light, every journey, and every waiting heart already belonged beneath the same endless sky. As Elias and Leora quietly followed the others toward the sleeping city, the blossom lantern at his side released one final, gentle glow. Another tiny golden blossom unfolded, not as a reward, not as a destination, only as a quiet reminder that the most beautiful journeys rarely bloom all at once. They bloom one peaceful moment at a time. Night settled gently across the sky, not as darkness, as another kind of light. The stars now shone with quiet confidence, while the countless lanterns that had risen during the evening ascent continued their peaceful climb through the heavens. Some had already become impossible to distinguish from the constellations. Others still glowed warmly above the floating city, like old friends reluctant to say goodbye. Elias and Leora walked without speaking. The broad avenue they had followed earlier now lay almost empty. Families had returned to their homes. Children carried sleeping lanterns tucked carefully beneath soft blankets. The little golden birds had disappeared into the silver trees, their tiny lanterns glowing faintly among the branches like resting fireflies. The entire sky seemed ready for dreams. Only one sound remained. Footsteps, theirs, soft against polished white stone. After a long while, Leora stopped beside a small bridge overlooking an endless sea of clouds. Moonlight rested peacefully upon the drifting mist below. It looked less like clouds now, and more like an ocean, quietly breathing beneath the stars. She leaned gently against the smooth wooden railing. Her lantern rested beside her, still dark, still beautiful. Elias joined her. Neither of them felt the need to interrupt the silence. Eventually, Leora smiled. When I was little, I used to come here every night. She looked down toward the clouds. I believed if I watched long enough, my lantern would suddenly decide to fly. She laughed softly. I never missed a single evening. Elias listened quietly. Did you ever become angry? She thought for a moment. A little, then embarrassed, then determined. Her fingers slowly traced the carved wooden pattern around the lantern's frame. After that, I became afraid. Elias turned toward her. Afraid of what? Her smile remained gentle, but her eyes reflected something older than sadness. I was afraid that one morning everyone else's lantern would have flown, and mine would still be waiting. The words drifted gently into the night. Elias understood them immediately, not because he had ever carried a lantern that refused to rise, because every traveler carried something that seemed slower than everyone else's. A dream, a hope, a beginning, a healing, something that quietly whispered, maybe everyone else is moving faster than you. The hidden library had never spoken about that feeling directly, yet somehow every destination had gently answered it. Leora looked toward the stars. I know what everyone says. Every lantern has its own time. Trust the sky. Keep believing. She smiled with quiet affection. They are kind words. They truly mean them. She lowered her eyes to the lantern, resting beside her. But after enough seasons, even kind words can become very heavy. Silence returned. The moon climbed a little higher. Far away, one lonely lantern drifted peacefully between two bright stars. Elias did not answer immediately. He wasn't searching for advice. He wasn't trying to solve her sorrow. The wind weaver had shown him another way. So instead, he asked only one quiet question. Leora. She looked at him. If your lantern never flew, would you still love it? For the first time since they had met, Leora didn't answer. She simply looked at the lantern resting beside her, and in the gentle moonlight, a single tear quietly found its way down her cheek. Not from despair, not from disappointment, but because no one had ever asked her that question before. The little tear caught the moonlight. For the briefest moment, it shimmered like one more tiny lantern among the stars. Leora did not wipe it away. She simply watched her lantern, resting quietly upon the bridge. Its polished cedar frame reflected the silver glow of the moon. Its crystal windows remained dark, yet somehow it had never looked more beautiful. A long silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, only honest. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know." Her voice was almost a whisper. "I've never thought about loving it without expecting it to change." The words seemed to surprise even her. She looked at the lantern again. "So much of my life has been waiting for tomorrow, waiting for the right season, waiting for the right wind." She smiled faintly. "I've never wondered if today might already be enough." Elias leaned gently against the wooden railing. Far below, the sea of clouds slowly rolled beneath the floating city. It reminded him of the sea of paper boats, thousands of quiet journeys, each moving in its own time. "I think," he said softly, "sometimes we become so busy waiting for one beautiful moment that we forget all the beautiful moments already walking beside us." Leora looked toward him. Her expression carried no surprise, only quiet listening. "You've shown me the listening tree, the house of first light, the wind garden, the evening ascent." He smiled gently. "None of them asked your lantern to fly." She slowly lowered her eyes. "No, they only asked me." She paused, then laughed quietly. To keep walking. For the first time that evening, the weight in her voice became just a little lighter. Not gone, only shared. The bridge remained wonderfully still. Nearby, a tiny golden bird landed upon the wooden railing between them. It carried no lantern this time, only a single tiny white feather. The little bird looked first at Elias, then at Leora, then quietly placed the feather beside her lantern. Without a sound, it flew away again. Neither of them moved. The feather rested gently against the smooth cedar wood. Leora smiled through another tiny tear. The birds do that sometimes. "What does it mean?" She carefully picked up the feather. "It means..." She turned it slowly in the moonlight. "The wind has noticed someone." Elias smiled. "I think the wind noticed you a long time ago." She shook her head. "No." Her voice was warm now. "I think tonight it noticed me, noticing myself." The words settled softly into the quiet night. Neither of them realized it, but somewhere high above, among the thousands of lanterns already shining between the stars, one tiny current of golden light slowly changed direction, not toward the heavens, toward the bridge where they stood. It moved so gently that even the stars seemed careful not to disturb it. And for the very first time, The little flame sleeping inside Leora's lantern gave the smallest, almost impossible flicker, only once, so softly that Leora never saw it. But Elias did. He said nothing. The hidden library had taught him one final lesson about hope. The quietest miracles often disappeared the moment someone tried to prove they had happened. Elias carried the quiet miracle within his heart. He spoke nothing of the tiny flicker, not because he doubted what he had seen, because he trusted it. The hidden library had never rushed a blossom to open. The wind garden had never hurried a young lantern into the sky. Why should hope be treated differently? The little white feather remained resting beside Leora's lantern. Moonlight painted its delicate edges with silver. It seemed impossibly light, yet somehow it carried a quiet presence all its own. Leora gently picked it up. She did not tuck it into her pocket. She did not keep it as a treasure. Instead, she slipped it carefully beneath the small leather strap that wrapped around the lantern's wooden handle. There, she smiled softly. It belongs with the journey. Elias noticed the way she had said journey, not destination. A gentle breeze wandered across the bridge. The feather trembled ever so slightly, almost as though it had found exactly where it wished to rest. For several peaceful moments, they simply watched the stars. Then Leora spoke again. "There is something I never told anyone." Her voice had become wonderfully calm. Not even the wind weaver. Elias looked toward her. "You don't have to tell me." She smiled. "I know. I think that's why I want to." She lowered her eyes. "When I received my lantern, everyone celebrated. My parents cried. My teachers smiled. The whole city believed my journey had begun." She laughed quietly. It had. But mine never looked like everyone expected. She gently touched the smooth cedar frame. After the first year, people encouraged me. "Be patient. Keep trusting." After 5 years, they comforted me. Every lantern has its own season. After 10 years, they stopped mentioning it, not because they were unkind, because kindness sometimes becomes quiet when it no longer knows how to help. Elias listened without interruption. Then she looked toward the endless stars. Something happened that frightened me. He waited. I began pretending that I wasn't waiting anymore. The words drifted into the night like falling petals. I smiled. I encouraged younger lantern keepers. I taught children to love their lanterns. And every evening, I came to the evening ascent. She smiled gently. Everyone thought I had found peace. She closed her eyes, but deep inside, I was still asking one tiny question. She whispered it so softly that the wind almost carried it away. "Why not mind?" Silence answered, not because there was no answer, because some questions deserved gentleness before they deserved words. Elias looked toward the sky. 1,000 lanterns continued their quiet ascent. None knew they were being watched. None rose to prove anything. They simply became themselves. He smiled, Leora. She opened her eyes. What if? He searched carefully for the gentlest truth. Your lantern has never been late. She looked at him with quiet curiosity. What if its journey has always been different from flying? The words settled between them. Neither accepted nor rejected. They simply rested there, like seeds waiting for spring. Far above, the tiny current of golden light that had changed direction earlier drifted a little closer. Still unseen, still silent, still choosing patience over spectacle. The blossom lantern beside Elias released another soft glow, not brighter than before, only warmer, as though somewhere deep within the hidden library, another page had quietly turned, and the story was finally ready to reveal why one lantern had waited for so very long. The night grew deeper, yet the sky never became darker. Every lantern that rose gently offered its light to another. Every star seemed to welcome one more companion. Above the floating city, hope had become something visible. Leora remained quietly beside the bridge. Her lantern rested between them. The tiny white feather moved gently whenever the evening breeze wandered past. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence no longer carried waiting. It carried companionship. At last, Leora looked toward Elias. "May I show you something?" He nodded. Without another word, she carefully lifted the lantern, not to release it, not to test it, simply to open it. A tiny brass clasp clicked softly beneath her fingers. The small wooden door slowly swung outward. Inside, there was no flame, only a perfectly polished crystal chamber. Empty, beautifully empty. Elias looked at it with quiet surprise. "I thought..." He stopped. "You thought every lantern already carried a light." She smiled gently. "Most people do." She carefully turned the lantern so the moonlight reached its crystal heart. "This lantern has never refused to fly." He looked at her. "It has never received its first light." The words settled between them like the softest snowfall. Everything Elias believed, he understood, quietly rearranged itself. The house of first light. He whispered, "I thought every lantern received its flame there." "They do." She nodded. but only when the keeper is ready. He blinked. I don't understand. Neither did I. She laughed softly. When I was young, I stood before the first light exactly as everyone else had. I waited. So did my teachers. So did the wind weaver. She looked into the empty crystal chamber. The flame never came. Not because it rejected me. It simply, she smiled with extraordinary peace, waited. Elias stared quietly at the empty lantern. For years, he had believed Leora's lantern remained dark because its light refused to awaken. Now he discovered something far gentler. The lantern had never been empty. It had been unfinished, like a book whose most beautiful chapter had simply not yet been written. The realization filled him with unexpected warmth. Not pity, wonder. Leora closed the little door again, with the same tenderness someone might tuck a sleeping child beneath a blanket. I spent many years believing something inside me was missing. She looked toward the stars. Now, I'm beginning to wonder if something extraordinary has simply been taking its time. The words felt different now. They no longer sounded like someone trying to comfort herself. They sounded true. A tiny golden bird quietly returned to the bridge. It landed upon the lantern's handle beside the white feather. Instead of singing, it gently rested its little head against the smooth cedar wood, only for a heartbeat. Then it flew peacefully back into the night. Leora smiled through quiet tears. They know. Elias looked upward. Who? The birds, the wind, the sky. She laughed softly. Sometimes I think everyone has stopped worrying except me. Elias smiled. No. She looked at him. I think tonight you stopped first. The words carried no judgment, only kindness. Above them, the mysterious golden current that had slowly been drawing closer throughout the evening finally reached the bridge. It circled Leora's lantern once, then disappeared into the quiet night. Neither Elias nor Leora saw it, but somewhere deep inside the house of first light, the tiny eternal flame resting above the crystal pool shimmered ever so gently, as though, for the first time in many years, it had quietly remembered someone's name. The bridge remained wonderfully quiet. Moonlight rested gently upon its white stone surface. The floating city behind them glowed with thousands of peaceful lanterns, while above, the endless heavens welcomed every rising light with patient grace. Leora carefully held the lantern in both hands. For the first time, Elias noticed she was no longer holding it, as though she were waiting for something to happen. She was simply holding it. The difference was almost impossible to see, yet impossible not to feel. A warm silence settled between them. Then Leora smiled. When I was a little girl, I used to imagine what my first light would look like. Elias looked toward her. I thought it would arrive like sunrise. She laughed softly, or perhaps like fireworks, something everyone would notice. She gently turned the lantern beneath the moonlight. Then I grew older, and I began hoping it would happen quietly, so quietly that only I would know. She looked into the crystal window. Now she smiled with peaceful honesty. I don't think either of those mattered. Elias waited. I think I simply wanted to know. She rested one hand over her heart. That I had never been forgotten. The words floated gently into the night. Not heavy, not sorrowful, only true. Elias looked toward the stars. He remembered every place the hidden library had carried him. The clockmaker had never forgotten broken clocks. The garden had never forgotten sleeping dreams. The tea house had never forgotten changing seasons. The valley had never forgotten silent bells. The sky could never forget one waiting lantern. The thought came so naturally that it almost felt as though someone had whispered it into his heart. He turned toward Leora. I don't believe. He spoke very softly. That something which waits with this much love. He gently nodded toward the lantern. Could ever be forgotten. Leora closed her eyes. She took one slow, peaceful breath. When she opened them again, the worry Elias had quietly noticed throughout the evening had become just a little smaller. Not because it had disappeared, because it no longer carried the whole weight alone. Far above, the last lantern of the evening ascent drifted into the stars. The terrace below slowly emptied. Families returned home together. Children slept peacefully upon their parents' shoulders, still holding little lanterns against their blankets. The tiny golden birds disappeared among silver branches, where their miniature lights glowed like gentle constellations, hidden within the trees. The sky had become wonderfully still. Then, a single silver bell echoed across the floating city. Only once. Leora smiled immediately. The midnight library. Elias looked toward her. There's another library. She laughed, a warm, quiet laugh filled with childhood affection. Not another. She looked toward the highest floating island beyond the city. A very small one. It only opens after every lantern has found its place for the night. He smiled. What kind of books does it keep? Leora's eyes sparkled beneath the moonlight. The ones that haven't happened yet. Elias blinked gently. She nodded. Every morning, one unwritten story, quietly leaves its shelves. And every night, another one returns. She looked toward the distant island, where a tiny building now glowed softly beneath the stars. The librarian says, "Stories travel exactly like lanterns. They never arrive early. They are never truly late. They simply appear when someone is finally ready to receive them." Elias quietly smiled. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the hidden library smiling too. The journey through the sky had never been about learning how lanterns flew. It had been preparing him for a story that had been waiting just beyond tomorrow and high above the sleeping city, hidden among thousands of peaceful stars. One lantern that had waited longer than all the others gave the faintest, most beautiful breath of golden light. The midnight library waited beyond the sleeping city, not hidden, simply unhurried. Leora and Elias followed a narrow bridge that curved gently away from the last glowing homes. Behind them, the sky city slowly settled into peaceful dreams. Lanterns resting upon balconies swayed gently beneath the night breeze. Soft music drifted from distant windows before quietly fading into silence. Even the clouds below seemed to move more slowly now, as though the entire sky had chosen to breathe a little deeper. The bridge became narrower, its polished white stone gradually transformed into smooth silver wood. Warm beneath their footsteps, despite the cool night air, tiny stars had been carved into its surface. Each one glowed faintly beneath the moonlight, not bright enough to guide travelers, only bright enough to remind them they were never walking alone. Ahead, a small island slowly emerged from the silver mist. Unlike every magnificent place Elias had visited so far, this one was wonderfully modest. No crystal towers, no soaring bridges, no rivers of floating lanterns, only a tiny round library nestled beneath an enormous ancient tree. Its roof had been covered with soft silver moss instead of tiles. Warm amber light glowed gently through circular windows. Outside, a single wooden bench rested beneath flowering branches, whose blossoms opened only beneath moonlight. The little building felt less like a destination and more like a favorite memory someone had carefully protected for generations. Leora smiled the moment she saw it. "I've always loved this place." Elias looked toward her. "More than the house of first light." She nodded without hesitation. "The first light teaches us to begin." She looked toward the little library with unmistakable affection. "This place teaches us how to continue." They stepped onto the tiny island. Immediately, Elias noticed something extraordinary. There wasn't a single lantern anywhere, not hanging from branches, not resting beside the doorway, not glowing through the windows. Instead, the entire library seemed illuminated by moonlight alone. Yet somehow, it felt warmer than any fire. Above the wooden door hung a beautifully hand-carved sign. Its silver letters shimmered softly beneath the stars. The Midnight Library below the title. Smaller words had been carved so delicately, they almost disappeared into the wood. Every unwritten tomorrow has already been welcomed. Elias read the sentence twice, then a third time. He smiled. Some places within the hidden library answered questions before anyone thought to ask them. Leora rested her hand upon the little wooden door. She did not knock. She simply waited for a heartbeat. Nothing happened then. From somewhere deep inside the tiny library came the gentle sound of a page turning. Only one page, soft enough that it might have been carried by the wind. The door slowly opened inward. Warm amber light welcomed them without a single word. The air inside carried the comforting fragrance of cedar shelves, old parchment, lavender blossoms, and freshly brewed chamomile tea. Elias smiled before he had even stepped inside. Some places seemed determined to help weary hearts rest. This was one of them. The Midnight Library was far smaller than the hidden library. Only one circular room. Bookshelves curved gracefully along every wall, reaching only a little higher than Elias' shoulders. No towering ladders, no endless corridors, no mysterious wings stretching beyond sight. Everything here seemed intentionally close, as though every story wished to remain within arm's reach. Moonlight poured gently through the round windows, blending with the warm glow of tiny candles resting upon polished wooden tables. Yet, Elias quickly noticed something unusual. None of the books carried titles. Their covers were beautifully crafted, some wrapped in soft blue linen, others bound in polished walnut leather. Several shimmered with silver threads, but every spine remained wonderfully blank. He looked toward Leora. They don't have names. She smiled knowingly. They haven't earned them yet. Before Elias could ask what she meant, a gentle voice floated through the quiet room. They are still listening. An elderly woman emerged from between two curved bookshelves. She moved slowly, not because age demanded it, but because peace had become her natural rhythm. Her long white hair had been braided with tiny silver blossoms. A warm gray shawl rested lightly across her shoulders. In one hand, she carried a small porcelain teapot. In the other, two simple ceramic cups. She smiled with the quiet familiarity of someone greeting neighbors, rather than strangers. "Good evening, Leora." Leora's entire face brightened. "Good evening, Mira." The elderly librarian looked toward Elias. "So," she smiled warmly, "the library has finally brought us another gentle listener." Elias bowed his head politely. "It's an honor to meet you." Mira chuckled softly. "Oh, my dear." She carefully placed the teapot upon a small wooden table. "No one comes here to be honored. They come here." She poured steaming tea into the waiting cups. "To remember that tomorrow has always been kinder than fear allows us to imagine." The tea released the comforting fragrance of honey, apple blossoms, and fresh mint. She offered one cup to Leora, another to Elias. Neither cup matched the other. Neither seemed intended to. Mira noticed Elias quietly observing them. "We've never believed that beautiful things must be identical." She smiled. "They only need to belong." Elias accepted the warm cup gratefully. The first sip surprised him. It tasted different from ordinary tea. Not sweeter, not stronger, simply familiar. Like the comforting drink someone might have prepared after a long journey home. He looked at Mira. "I've never tasted anything like this." She laughed gently. "You have." He looked puzzled. She smiled into her own cup. "You simply haven't remembered it until now." The room settled once again into peaceful silence. Somewhere among the curved shelves, another unseen page quietly turned, not because someone touched it, as though another unwritten tomorrow had just become ready to begin listening. The page turned once more, softly, almost shyly. Elias looked toward the curved shelves. No breeze stirred the room. No visible hand reached for a book. Yet somewhere, one unwritten story had quietly awakened. Mira noticed where he was looking. There, becoming curious, Elias smiled. "The books," she nodded, as though there were nothing unusual about the idea. "They've been listening ever since you arrived." He glanced around the little library. "Listening to what?" Mira settled comfortably into a wooden chair beside the round window. She wrapped both hands around her warm cup. "Not your words." She smiled. "You're becoming." Those two words rested gently inside the room. Leora seemed to understand them immediately. Elias quietly held them within his thoughts. The hidden library had often changed him, but perhaps this was the first place that simply noticed those changes. Mira slowly rose. "Come." She walked toward the nearest bookshelf. Unlike the towering shelves of the hidden library, these were built almost at eye level, comfortable, welcoming, as though no story wished to stand above another. She lightly rested one fingertip upon a blank book bound in pale blue linen. "It isn't finished." She smiled. "It doesn't know how." Elias stepped closer. "But someone will write it." Mira gently shook her head. "No." She looked toward him kindly. "They'll live it." Silence followed. Not empty silence. The kind that quietly rearranged old ideas into gentler ones. She slowly moved her hand to another book. This one wore deep green leather, stitched with silver thread. Still blank, still waiting. Some stories arrive quickly. She continued. They know exactly who they are. Her fingers drifted toward a tiny cream-colored volume. Others spend years listening. She smiled affectionately. They become wiser because of it. Elias looked across the shelves. Hundreds of unwritten books. None impatient. None forgotten. Only waiting. A thought quietly bloomed inside him. "What happens?" he asked carefully, "when someone's story is complete?" Mira looked toward the moonlit window. For several peaceful moments, she simply watched the stars. Then she answered. "It receives its title." The room seemed even quieter than before. Leora smiled softly. "I always loved that answer." Mira laughed. "I know." She gently brushed invisible dust from one blank spine. "It reminds people that names are rarely the beginning. They are usually the reward." Elias slowly walked along the curved shelves. He noticed something he had missed before. Every blank book felt slightly different beneath the moonlight. Some shimmered warmly. Others reflected silver. A few seemed almost transparent. None identical. Just like the lanterns. Just like the travelers. Without realizing it, he stopped before one particularly small book. Its cover had been bound in simple white linen. No decoration, no stitching, only quiet simplicity. Something about it felt strangely familiar. He reached toward it, then paused. The Wind Weaver's lesson returned once again. Never steal the journey from another traveler. Perhaps books deserved the same kindness. He lowered his hand. Instead of opening it, he simply smiled at it. At that exact moment, the little white book released the faintest golden shimmer, not bright enough to light the shelf, only enough to let Elias know that sometimes being understood was more than enough. Mira had been watching from across the room. Her eyes sparkled with quiet approval. She whispered, "So few people realize that unopened stories can feel gratitude too." The little white book slowly returned to stillness. Its faint golden shimmer faded gently into the moonlit shelf, leaving only quiet simplicity behind. Elias smiled. For the first time, he realized that not every beautiful thing asked to be opened. Some simply wished to be trusted. Mira poured another little cup of tea. The fragrance drifted softly through the circular room. Outside, the stars continued multiplying above the sleeping sky. Inside, time itself seemed to breathe more slowly. Leora wandered peacefully along another curved bookshelf. Unlike Elias, she did not pause before any particular volume. Instead, she gently brushed her fingertips across the blank spines as she walked, one after another, almost as though greeting old friends. Elias noticed, "You've been here many times." She laughed quietly. "More times than I could count. And you still don't choose a book." She looked toward him with warm eyes. "I used to." She smiled. "I stopped." He tilted his head curiously. "Why?" Before Leora could answer, Mira spoke from beside the window. Because one evening, she finally understood that tomorrow becomes much smaller the moment we try to read it too early. Leora laughed again. I was terribly impatient. She looked at the shelves with affectionate embarrassment. I wanted to know everything. My lantern, my future, my purpose, my journey. I thought if I found the right book, I would finally stop wondering. She rested one hand lightly upon a blank, silver-covered volume. But then, I noticed something. Elias waited. The happiest people who visited this little library were never the ones who tried hardest to find tomorrow. She smiled peacefully. They were the ones who thanked today first. The room quietly settled around those words. Mira nodded with unmistakable affection. The Midnight Library has protected many futures, not by hiding them. She gently lifted her teacup by reminding people that they are already living the first page. Outside the round window, a single shooting star crossed the heavens. It left behind no blazing trail, only a quiet silver line that slowly disappeared into the night. Elias watched it until the sky became still again. So, he spoke thoughtfully. No one reads these books. Mira smiled. Oh, sometimes they do. She slowly walked toward the farthest bookshelf in the room. Unlike every other shelf, this one held only 3 books. None were blank. Their covers carried delicate golden lettering, old, worn smooth by loving hands. She rested one hand gently upon the first. These belong to travelers whose journeys have become gifts for others. She did not open it. She simply smiled. Their stories finished becoming tomorrow and quietly became hope. Elias looked at the 3 completed books. Only 3, among hundreds still waiting. Somehow, that made them even more precious. Mira noticed his expression. Never measure a story by how quickly it receives its title. She looked lovingly toward the endless shelves of unwritten tomorrows. The longest journeys often become the gentlest light. Without realizing it, Elias glanced toward Leora. She stood quietly among the blank books. Her lantern still rested peacefully in her hands. Its crystal heart remained empty. Yet tonight, for the very first time, it no longer looked unfinished. It looked patient, and somehow that felt far more beautiful. At that very moment, from somewhere high above the tiny library, 3 soft knocks echoed gently upon the wooden roof. Not loud, not startling, almost as though someone wearing the night itself had quietly arrived at exactly the right page. The 3 gentle knocks came again, not louder, simply closer. The little midnight library remained perfectly calm. Neither Mira nor Leora looked surprised. Instead, both smiled with quiet familiarity. Elias glanced toward the wooden ceiling. Someone's here. Mira nodded. They always arrive after the final lantern has settled. She carefully placed her teacup upon the small round table. Would you open the door? Elias blinked. Me. She smiled. I think the library would like that. He slowly crossed the circular room. Every floorboard beneath his feet carried the soft warmth of polished cedar. The little library seemed almost to breathe with him. He reached the door, rested one hand upon its smooth wooden handle, then gently pulled it open. Outside, the night waited peacefully. The silver blossoms above the doorway shimmered beneath the moon. The bridge stretched quietly back toward the sleeping sky city. Yet, no one stood there. Only a small wooden basket rested neatly upon the doorstep. It had been woven from pale willow branches. Inside lay 7 tightly rolled scrolls, each tied with a different colored ribbon. Blue, amber, silver, green, rose, ivory, and one wrapped in deep midnight blue. Elias carefully lifted the basket. It felt surprisingly light, as though it carried paper and little else. When he returned inside, Mira smiled warmly. Right on time. Leora laughed softly. They never miss an evening. Elias placed the basket upon the wooden table. What are they? Mira untied the first ribbon with extraordinary care. She unrolled the little scroll. Instead of words, the parchment remained completely blank. He looked puzzled. It's empty. She nodded happily. Exactly. She gently rolled it closed again. Tomorrow hasn't happened yet. Elias looked from the scroll to the shelves of untitled books, then back again. Understanding slowly began to bloom. These are tomorrow's stories. Mira's eyes sparkled. They are tomorrow's invitations. She carefully arranged the 7 scrolls in a small circle. Every dawn, the Midnight Library quietly sends unwritten pages wherever hope may need them. Some become songs, some become conversations, some become acts of kindness. She smiled, and occasionally, one becomes an adventure. Leora looked toward Elias with gentle amusement. The hidden library likes adventures. He smiled. I've noticed. Mira slowly reached for the final scroll, the one wrapped in the midnight blue ribbon. She held it thoughtfully for several moments. Then, without opening it, she placed it into Elias' hands. He looked surprised. For me, she nodded. It belongs to the traveler. He carefully held the unopened scroll. What does it say? Mira's smile became wonderfully mysterious. It says exactly what tomorrow needs it to say. He laughed softly. But it's blank. For tonight, she gently touched the ribbon. Tomorrow, it will remember. Silence settled lovingly around the little room. Outside, the moon climbed a little higher. Inside, the unwritten scroll rested peacefully within Elias' hands. He felt no desire to untie it. Not anymore. For the first time since entering the hidden library, he truly understood. Some gifts became smaller. The moment curiosity opened them too soon. Some gifts became extraordinary simply by trusting they would arrive at the perfect time. Mira looked toward both of them. The sky has shared everything it wished to teach. She smiled toward the unopened scroll. And tomorrow, the library will begin teaching again. The tiny candles throughout the midnight library softly dimmed, not because the night was ending, because the lesson was complete. Outside, the first hint of dawn still rested far beyond the horizon. But somewhere, deep within the hidden library, another quiet doorway had already begun to remember their names. The first whisper of dawn had not yet reached the horizon. The stars still ruled the heavens. Yet, something had changed. The night no longer felt as though it were waiting. It felt as though it were listening. Elias, Leora, and Mira stepped quietly from the midnight library. Behind them, the little round door closed without a sound. Its warm amber windows slowly dimmed until they became almost indistinguishable from the moonlight itself. The ancient tree above the library gently released a single silver blossom. It drifted slowly downward, not toward the ground, but toward the roof. There it quietly disappeared into the silver moss, as though the tree itself tucked every beautiful night safely away. before morning arrived. Leora smiled. It thanks every traveler. Elias looked up. The tree, she nodded. It remembers every goodbye. The three of them began walking back across the narrow silver bridge. The tiny stars carved into the wooden path glowed softly beneath their feet. Ahead, the sleeping sky city rested peacefully beneath countless floating lanterns that now looked almost like a second constellation, suspended beneath the heavens. No voices echoed through the streets, only the gentle singing of the night wind. Halfway across the bridge, Mira quietly stopped, so she smiled toward Elias. What will you carry home? He looked thoughtfully toward the stars. The scroll. She laughed. No. He looked puzzled. The scroll belongs to tomorrow. She placed one gentle hand over her own heart. What will you carry that tomorrow cannot take away? The question settled softly into the quiet air. Elias did not answer immediately. He thought about the clockmaker, the river, the house of first light, the wind weaver, the evening ascent, the midnight library. Then he smiled. I think I'll carry patience. Leora looked toward him, not because waiting became easier. He gently shook his head, but because I finally met people who showed me that waiting can also be beautiful. Neither woman spoke. Neither needed to. Mira's smile quietly deepened. The library chose well. A gentle breeze crossed the bridge. The little white feather tied to Leora's lantern fluttered softly. This time, Leora noticed it. She watched it dance in the moonlight before looking down at her lantern. Then, very slowly, she lifted it toward the stars, not to see if it would fly, not to test it, simply to let it enjoy the sky. The empty crystal chamber reflected hundreds of stars at once. For a brief moment, it appeared completely filled with light, not because a flame had arrived, because heaven itself had quietly entered. Leora's eyes widened ever so slightly. Then she laughed, a laugh unlike any Elias had heard before. Not hopeful, not relieved, joyful, purely joyful. I've been looking in the wrong direction, she whispered. Elias smiled. What do you see? She turned the lantern gently. The stars continued dancing inside its crystal heart. I kept waiting for the light to appear inside. She looked upward, but perhaps it has been surrounding me all along. The words floated into the sleeping sky, and somewhere, far beyond the floating islands, deep within the eternal chamber of the house of first light, the ancient flame quietly awakened, not brighter, not larger, only recognizing, for after all these years, the keeper who had once arrived asking for a miracle had finally returned, already carrying one. For a long while, none of them moved. The stars resting inside Leora's lantern slowly shifted as the heavens turned above them. They were only reflections, yet they transformed the empty crystal chamber into something unexpectedly beautiful. Leora smiled through quiet tears. So many evenings, she whispered, I looked into this lantern, searching for what wasn't there. She gently turned it once more beneath the moonlight. I never stopped to notice everything it was already holding. Mira's eyes shimmered warmly. The first light has never rushed toward an empty heart. She stepped a little closer. It waits until the heart has learned to recognize light it did not create. The words drifted gently into the sleeping sky. Elias suddenly remembered something. The listening tree, the wind weaver, the evening ascent, the midnight library. None of them had tried to place something inside Leora. Every one of them had quietly helped her notice what had always surrounded her. Perhaps that had been the journey all along, not searching for light, learning to receive it. The three of them slowly continued walking toward the Sky City. The streets remained wonderfully still. Tiny lanterns glowed beneath windows. Soft curtains stirred gently in the cool night breeze. A baker quietly placed warm bread upon a windowsill before returning indoors. A grandmother carefully covered two sleeping children's lanterns with small wool blankets, smiling as though tucking them into bed. Nothing grand, nothing extraordinary, only ordinary kindness. The hidden library seemed to love such moments most of all. As they reached the highest terrace once more, Leora quietly stopped. She looked toward the vast heavens filled with lanterns and stars. Then, without hesitation, she carefully placed her own lantern upon the smooth, white stone beside her, not to leave it behind, only to let it rest beneath the sky. She stepped back, folded her hands peacefully before her, closed her eyes. She asked for nothing. She wished for nothing. She expected nothing. She simply stood beside the lantern, the same way Elias had stood beside her, without trying to carry its journey. The night became astonishingly still. Even the gentle breeze seemed to pause. Far above, one golden lantern slowly drifted across the stars. Then another, each passing directly above the little lantern, resting quietly upon the terrace, not touching it, only blessing it with their light. Mira lowered her eyes. A quiet smile appeared upon her face. It has begun. Elias looked toward her. What has? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward Leora, who still stood with peaceful eyes closed. Finally, Mira whispered, "The waiting is no longer asking to end. It has become trust." At that very moment, deep within the crystal heart of Leora's lantern, the reflections of the stars slowly gathered together, not into a flame, not yet, into something even gentler. A warm golden glow appeared without fire, soft, living, like the very first hint of sunrise, quietly remembering the horizon. Leora opened her eyes. She looked down. The lantern remained exactly as it had always been, still without a first light, still without a flame, yet its crystal heart now held a warmth that had never been there before. She placed both hands gently over her mouth, not from surprise, from gratitude. A single whisper escaped her lips. "So," she smiled through tears. "This is how morning begins." No one spoke. No one needed to. The little golden glow resting inside Leora's lantern was softer than candlelight, softer than moonlight. It almost seemed alive, not burning, breathing. The warmth spread gently through the crystal chamber without casting shadows. It asked nothing of the darkness around it. It simply existed. Peacefully, Leora slowly knelt beside the lantern, not to examine it, not to prove it was real. She simply rested one hand upon its smooth cedar frame. The tiny white feather tied beneath the leather strap stirred gently in the night breeze. For years, she had imagined this moment. She had imagined joy, relief, celebration, perhaps even astonishment. Instead, what she felt was something wonderfully different. Home, as though a part of herself that had wandered quietly for many seasons had finally sat down beside her. A tear slipped gently across her cheek. She smiled through it. "I don't feel different," she whispered. Mira nodded. "You aren't." Leora looked toward her. "The light didn't come to make you someone new." She stepped closer. "It came because you finally stopped believing you needed to become someone else." Those words settled into the sleeping sky like gentle snow. Elias felt them just as deeply. He thought about every place the hidden library had carried him. The clockmaker had never tried to make broken clocks into new ones. The garden had never hurried forgotten dreams to bloom. The tea house had never rushed the seasons. The wind weaver had never commanded the wind. Every destination had quietly offered the same gift: permission, permission to become. Without comparison, Leora gently lifted her lantern once more. The warm glow remained, still without a flame, still unlike every other lantern she had ever seen. Mira watched it with unmistakable affection. It remembered. Leora smiled. What remembered? The first light. She gently touched the lantern's wooden handle. It was never waiting for the right wind. It was waiting. She looked lovingly into Leora's eyes. For the right welcome. Silence returned then, far beyond the highest floating island. A warm golden beam quietly appeared, not in the sky, from the house of first light. It stretched gently across the sleeping city, across the floating bridges, across the silver trees, across the sea of clouds, until it rested softly upon Leora's lantern. The beam carried no heat, only recognition. The warm glow inside the crystal chamber answered immediately, not by becoming brighter, by becoming complete. A tiny flame appeared, no larger than the blossom upon Elias' lantern. Golden, steady, perfectly peaceful. It did not burst into life. It simply opened, exactly the way a flower opens beneath the first light of morning. Leora stared quietly at it. She did not cry. She did not laugh. She closed her eyes, placed one gentle hand over her heart, and whispered only 3 words. Thank you for waiting. At that exact moment, every lantern drifting among the stars gave the faintest golden shimmer, not because they had been commanded, because somewhere across the sky, one long-awaited journey had finally found its own gentle beginning, and the hidden library, which had quietly watched every step from the very first doorway, turned another invisible page, not because a story had ended, because one beautiful chapter had finally received its title. The tiny flame rested quietly within the crystal heart. It neither flickered nor reached upward. It simply remained, steady, peaceful, certain. The golden beam from the house of first light slowly faded into the night. Its purpose had been fulfilled, yet the warmth inside Leora's lantern remained exactly the same. She looked at the little flame for a very long time. Then, to Elias' surprise, she smiled and gently closed the lantern's tiny wooden door. The warm light continued glowing through the crystal windows. Soft, comforting, never dazzling. Mira laughed gently. I wondered when you would do that. Leora looked toward her. For years, she smiled with quiet affection. I believed I wanted everyone to see it. She rested one hand lovingly upon the lantern. Now, I simply want to walk beside it. The words filled Elias with a quiet joy. He finally understood. The miracle had never been the flame. The miracle was the peace that welcomed it. A soft breeze wandered across the highest terrace, the tiny white feather tied beneath the lantern's leather strap gently loosened. Leora noticed. She carefully untied it. For a heartbeat, she simply held it in her hand, the feather that had quietly accompanied her through the longest waiting of her life. She looked toward Elias, then toward Mira. Finally, she smiled. I think it has another journey now. She released it. The feather did not fall. It rose. Not quickly, not like a lantern. It drifted peacefully into the night until a tiny golden bird appeared from somewhere among the stars. Without hesitation, the little bird gently caught the feather in its beak. It circled once above the three travelers, then disappeared toward the wind garden. Mira watched it go. The garden will know. Leora tilted her head. Know what? That another waiting heart. She smiled warmly. Has remembered how to bloom. Far away, bells began ringing once again. Not the evening ascent, not midnight, the very first bells of morning. One gentle note, then another. The eastern horizon slowly softened. Deep sapphire became quiet indigo. Indigo slowly welcomed silver. The very first colors of dawn stretched peacefully across the endless clouds. The floating islands glowed with gentle morning light. Tiny windows throughout the sky city slowly brightened as another day quietly prepared to begin. Elias watched the sunrise. It looked different now, not because the sky had changed, because he had the blossom lantern hanging beside him, released one final golden blossom. The little flower slowly opened completely. Unlike every blossom before it, this one did not remain upon the lantern. It quietly lifted into the morning breeze. It drifted upward, higher, higher, until it joined the thousands of lanterns still resting peacefully among the stars. Leora smiled. I've never seen that before. Mira nodded. It isn't leaving. She looked toward Elias. It's remembering. Silence returned one final time. The kind of silence that comes only after a story has found exactly the ending it had always been searching for. Mira gently placed one hand upon Leora's shoulder, then another upon Elias. You've both given the sky a beautiful gift. Elias smiled. We didn't do very much. Mira's eyes shone with timeless kindness. The greatest gifts rarely feel great while we're giving them. Together, the three of them stood beneath the first sunrise, watching a new day arrive, not with excitement, not with sadness, only with quiet gratitude, because they finally understood something the hidden library had known from the very beginning. Every journey, whether it lasts a single evening or many quiet years, arrives exactly when it is ready, and every heart, without exception, already carries within it the light it has been searching for all along. Morning arrived without ever disturbing the night. The stars slowly surrendered the heavens, not because they had disappeared, because daylight had gently invited them to rest. Across the floating city, windows opened one by one. Fresh bread warmed quiet kitchens. Silver birds greeted the sunrise with soft songs. Children stretched sleepily before carrying their little lanterns into another beautiful day. Nothing in the sky had changed, yet somehow everything had. Leora looked toward the little flame, resting peacefully inside her lantern. She no longer watched it with wonder. She greeted it the way one greets an old friend, with gratitude, without surprise. She smiled. I spent so many years believing this moment would be the end of my journey. She looked toward Elias. It isn't. He smiled warmly. No, it's the first morning. Mira laughed softly. Exactly. She looked toward the awakening city. The first light has never meant the first miracle. It means the first morning after you finally believe the miracle belongs with you. Those words drifted gently across the brightening sky. Leora rested her lantern beside Elias' blossom lantern. For a moment, the two quiet lights stood together, neither brighter than the other, neither more important, only two different journeys, meeting beneath the same sunrise. The blossom lantern glowed warmly. Leora's first light answered with the same gentle peace. Neither tried to outshine the other. The hidden library had never measured light, only love. Far below, the endless sea of clouds slowly opened. For just a heartbeat, the sunlight reflected across the white mist in such a way that it resembled an enormous open book. Its pages stretched from horizon to horizon, golden, limitless, waiting. Elias looked toward it in quiet amazement. Then, without warning, he heard the voice he had first listened to so many journeys ago, not spoken aloud, remembered. Every traveler believes they are searching for the library. Very few discover. The library has always been searching for them. He closed his eyes and smiled. He finally understood. The hidden library had never collected stories. It gathered hearts until they remembered they had always belonged within one another. The morning breeze wandered softly across the highest terrace. It carried no command, no prophecy, only the comforting fragrance of cedar, blossoms, fresh bread, and rain-washed clouds. The fragrance of home. Leora gently lifted her lantern. The little flame inside danced once. almost playfully. She laughed. "I think it's happy." Elias smiled. "I think so are you." She looked toward him. "I am." No hesitation, no uncertainty, only truth. Mira quietly bowed her head. "My work here has become wonderfully small." Elias looked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled with the peaceful certainty of someone who had watched countless beautiful mornings arrive. The finest librarians know exactly when to stop turning pages. She slowly stepped back toward the little midnight library, not disappearing, simply returning home. The round wooden door opened by itself. Warm amber light welcomed her once again. Before entering, she looked toward Elias one final time. One day, another traveler will arrive carrying questions too heavy to hold alone. She smiled. When that happens, walk beside them. Nothing more, nothing less. The door quietly closed. The tiny library rested once again beneath its ancient silver tree, as though it had always been there and always would be. Elias and Leora stood together beneath the endless morning sky. No destination waited. No mystery demanded solving. No lesson remained unfinished. Only another peaceful day, ready to be lived. Far above them, among countless golden lanterns that had become indistinguishable from the stars, two new lights quietly found their place. One carried a blossom, one carried a first flame. Neither had hurried to arrive. Both had arrived exactly when they were ready, and somewhere beyond every doorway, beyond every lantern, beyond every unwritten tomorrow, the hidden library quietly welcomed another page into its endless collection, not because the journey had ended, but because, like every beautiful story, it had finally remembered how to become home. As the morning gently welcomes another quiet day, allow your own thoughts to become just a little lighter. Tonight, Elias discovered that the brightest light was never something waiting at the end of the journey. It had been quietly growing within every patient step he chose to take. And perhaps the same is true for us. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow may bring, may you remember that your own light never needs to hurry. It only asks to be welcomed. Thank you for spending this peaceful evening inside the hidden library. If these gentle journeys help bring a little more calm into your nights, your support helps keep the lanterns glowing for every traveler who finds their way here. Sparkles, asterisk, asterisk. Our journey continues. Asterisk, asterisk. Beyond another quiet doorway, another peaceful adventure is already waiting to be remembered. Until then, sleep peacefully, dream gently, and we'll meet again inside the hidden library. Good night, crescent moon.